The officiating in that game was, well, it was something I wish I could be a lot more annoyed about. It was bad, but in the end, the Kraken just didn't play well enough to win. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken lose 2-1 in LA against the Kings, in a game that felt quite reminiscent of the previous road trip, where they just couldn't produce anything dangerous, at least offensively, for the first two periods, and finally showed some push and some urgency in the third period, but by that point, it turned out to be too little too late. So even though some terrible officiating, and one bad call in particular, which we'll get to, did lead directly to the game-deciding goal, the Kraken did more than enough to earn this loss, not only in other great chances that they gave the Kings to score that Decord was just fantastic in net and able to stop, but the Kraken didn't create enough dangerous looks the other way to overcome the chances that they gave the Kings. But before we get too deeply into the game, there's some more bad news for the Kraken that we actually got before the game started, even the day before the game started, as we found out a little bit more about Eberle's injury. He had an issue with his pelvis that required surgery, and now we'll have him out for at least the next 3 months. It does mean he'll likely go to LTIR, and the Kraken will probably be without him for, well, at least the majority of the rest of the season, if not all the way until hopefully he's back for a potential playoff run or a push for the playoffs in the last couple weeks of the season. So, I mean, go figure that after the first season, when the Kraken had their first captain, Mark Giordano, and then he gets traded at the deadline towards the end of the year, we thought that this would finally be the season with Eberle as the captain. We'll get a captain for at least 1 full year. And now, a month into the season, he's injured and going to miss more time than Gio missed after the trade deadline that first season. This is why we can't have nice things. And also on the injury front, we get some more kind of bittersweet news, upside with some downside, that Dunn was back and practicing with the team, even in a contact jersey, or at least not a non-contact jersey. It's not like they're actually going to be hitting a guy that they know is injured and done, and it's not like it was a practice with contact. Anyway, the point is, even though Dunn is back with the team and was skating with the team in practice, they are still saying that he's not particularly close to returning, so it's a good sign, but not close to returning is not what you want to hear either, so yeah, take it either way, I suppose. And obviously it probably goes without saying that neither injury, the continued recovery for Vince Dunn, or now losing Eberle for 3 months, particularly helps a team that's scoring, well, dries up entirely on occasion, and certainly seems to dry up quite a bit more on the road. I mean, heck, even at that, and even with Eberle having missed already the last 3 games for the Kraken, plus the part of the game that he missed when he actually got injured, he's still third on the team in scoring, with Montour having just passed him in this one. Regardless, at this point, the Kraken are clearly going to have to figure something out to get things going offensively, at least more consistently anyway. And I gotta say, I don't think continuously scratching Shane Wright is that. And it's nothing against Ben Meyers, but to be honest, I don't think Meyers' upside is anywhere near where Wright's is, even with where Wright is right now. And while I understood 1 game, and I could kind of see 2, give him a week off and a chance to practice a little bit more and focus on those smaller things, I don't know what else is going on around the team that we aren't seeing in games that maybe the coaches are seeing in practices, or what they're seeing from Meyers, but Wright gets scratched for the 3rd game in a row, and I honestly, I don't know. I don't understand it. I think the team is better with Wright on it. I don't necessarily think that whatever problem they think Wright had is going to get fixed by sitting him for 2 straight weeks, but, well, hopefully he gets a chance to play against some weaker opponents that the Kraken have coming up in their next 4 games, 2 against the Ducks and then 2 against the Sharks. Now that we're all caught up, though, let's get into the game itself, where right out of the gate, it's all Kings for the first few minutes of the game. The Kraken are, I mean, at the very least, they are playing pretty well in kind of a 10-foot by a 10-foot square around their net, which helped Decord make the saves he needed to make. I don't know that there was any necessarily, like, amazing saves that Decord made in that first stretch, but the Kings did get a lot of chances, almost 1 full expected goal worth of chances just in the first few minutes of the game alone. The Kraken are able to survive all of it thanks to a couple of good saves by Decord and some timely blocks or deflected passes. The Kraken not really able to get anything going outside of their own blue line, but bend don't break defense seems to be working for them through those first few minutes. And then once we get past that point, the Kings just don't get another shot on goal the rest of the period. Not that the Kraken get much back the other way. Eventually, by the end of the period, the Kraken are out shooting the Kings, though it's only by 1. And as a whole, this period is Very LA Kings hockey with only 9 shots on goal between the two teams. Which, real quick, for anybody that doesn't want to bother doing the math, that means the Kraken had 5 shots to 4 for the Kings, though the 4 for the Kings were much more dangerous, and the stuff that happened around them was much more dangerous than anything the Kraken produced in that first period. So we go to the second period where, after an early push from the Kraken, the Kings start to establish some momentum early on, and this time they are able to open up the scoring with it. It comes off of a pass down into the slot for I don't know if I would necessarily say wide open Kempe. I don't think this is necessarily terrible defense from the Kraken. It's certainly not good defense, but at least Larson is right there with his stick in front of Kempe to... I mean, usually you get a deflection up out of play when you're able to get your stick right in front of a shot like that. Unfortunately, Kempe is able to lift it above Larson's stick and then also above the blocker into the near side top corner past Decord. It's just a really nice shot that he's able to get off quickly before Larson can close up there with Sprong coming up behind Kempe. He's a good player. They were able to find the little window that they needed to get that pass to him for him to get the shot off quickly. He beats Decord and it's 1-0 Kings. And that leads us pretty much directly into what turns out to be the game-deciding moment. Well, game deciding if you ignore all the other stuff the Kraken didn't do well that Decord saved them from, and then the fact the Kraken didn't score. But almost immediately after the ensuing faceoff, the Kraken are able to get pressed into the offensive end. Well, let's be honest with ourselves, Gord gets a press into the offensive end as he's able to push and work his way around the Kings defense to make a hooking power move towards the net with the puck. He does get the shot off, but Riddick's able to make a fairly easy save as Gord's not able to lift the puck above Riddick's pad. And then Gord, with that move towards the net, is not given the opportunity to slow up and stop before colliding with Riddick, as he's got the King defender that he managed to get around hanging all over his back and pushing him into Riddick, which the officials decide then means the Kings go to the power play for goaltender interference. And just to be perfectly clear, no, you're not allowed to collide with the goaltender regardless of whether or not you get the shot off, but at the same time, it's also not goaltender interference if, 1, you get pushed into the goaltender, as Gord does here, or 2, if you make an effort to stop and avoid that collision, which Gord definitely does. Unfortunately, he's just not the biggest player in the world, and although he does try to slow up and stop before colliding with Riddick, he has a Kings player hanging all over his back and forcing the issue. But regardless of what the rulebook says, or the obvious reality of the situation on this play, since, as we know, at the very least on occasion, that a basic understanding of the NHL rules is more of a disqualifier than a prerequisite for being an NHL official, they still decide that this is goaltender interference and send Gord to the penalty box, which is bad for the Kraken, not only because it obviously sends the Kings to a power play they never should have had, but it also sends one of the best penalty killers the Kraken have to the box for those 2 minutes. With all that having been said, the good news for the Kraken is that the Kings have one of the worst power plays in the NHL, so with a pretty good penalty kill so far this season, the Kraken shouldn't have too much trouble killing it off. But unfortunately, as you've probably already well figured out by now if you hadn't already watched the game, since, let's be honest, I wouldn't be spending this much time on this series of events if the Kings hadn't scored on this power play, they do end up scoring. Right around halfway through the power play, they get set up in the offensive end. They are able to get some good puck movement around the outside, get Joey moving in his net and in his crease, and eventually that leads to a one-time shot from the far side, wide open as the Kraken are just all bunched up in the middle of the slot, so not particularly well killed off or well positioned by the Kraken on this play. It allows Byfield to get off a completely wide open shot without any of the Kraken penalty killers, even outside of being anywhere near him, anywhere near a passing or shooting lane that would lead to this shot. So yeah, a wide open pass leads to a wide open one-timer. Decord's a little bit too far from the post, isn't able to get back in time. It finds its way inside the near side past Decord's glove to give the Kings the power play goal and the 2-0 lead. So one more time then, a horrendous call from the officials and an uninspiring, to say the very least, penalty kill for the Kraken against one of the league's worst power plays leads to the 2-0 lead for the Kings, which at this point in the game, not quite halfway through the second, did feel like it was going to be pretty hard for the Kraken to come back from. They just were not creating anything dangerous back the other way. And it's not like the Kings were getting much going of their own accord, but they still were able to score twice. And in general, this was just that type of LA Kings incredibly low event hockey that definitely makes a 2-0 lead feel a lot harder to come back from than maybe some other opponents the Kraken have played against so far this season, where they were able to overcome that deficit. And that stays true throughout the rest of the second period, even with the Kraken getting 2 late second period power plays of their own. Not that Alexiak drew either one of them, who had already gotten blatantly tripped on a rush in the first period with no call, and then hit in the face with a high stick earlier in the second, also with no call. Well, based on how these last 2 power plays of the period do go for the Kraken, it might not have mattered anyway, as the Kraken special teams just did not show up to play this game. The first power play doesn't go much of anywhere for the Kraken. They get a couple shot attempts towards the end of it, but nothing dangerous that had any chance of going in. And then the second power play coming towards the end of the period, the Kraken at one point just completely lose track of the puck. None of the 5 of them have any idea where it is. The Kings, however, find the puck at center ice and carry it 2-on-0 shorthanded into the Kraken end. And when I say 2-on-0 shorthanded, and if I told you that these 2 guys were wide open all by themselves, that would be a massive understatement. This screenshot shows that they are pretty much all alone in the offensive end. You can't quite see all the way to the blue line, but I think it might be just about at this moment, if not a little bit later as they get closer to the net, when finally a Kraken player does cross the blue line into the defensive end. Not that it really matters where the other Kraken players are, or any of the Kraken players are, as none of them are anywhere near close enough to this play to do anything about it, so these 2 might as well be the only 2 skaters on the ice, and the only other 2 players besides Decord, as they skate in 2-on-0, again, shorthanded. This is on a Kraken power play, and Decord somehow is able to come up with the save. There's a bit of overpassing that happens here. They go back and forth quite a bit, just, I guess, competing for who was going to be the one to get the primary assist. In the end, neither of them get it, as Decord comes up with the massive save. Those heroics from Decord prevent the Kraken from going down 3-0, where they absolutely deserve to be down 3-0, giving up their second shorthanded goal of the season. In some ways, I suppose this makes up for the power play goal that the Kings got that never should have happened, since they never should have been on the power play. And yeah, it's not the same thing, since the Kings got that from bad officiating, and they didn't get this goal because, well, they overpassed the puck and Decord makes a play. That's just part of playing hockey, is that sometimes players make great plays and overpassing happens. But again, as far as the flow of play and what the Kraken deserve to have as far as the outcome of this game is concerned, in that way, yeah, this does kind of make up for the goal the Kings never should have had on that power play earlier in the period. Having survived that and the rest of their own power play, the Kraken do get to the second intermission, still down just 2, and then finally in the third period, they are able to get things going. They look like they've got a sense of urgency. They're creating offensive zone pressure, getting some pretty good chances, even chances that have a realistic opportunity of going into the net. But Riddick makes a couple of big saves. Montour has one shot that Riddick is able to dive across to get a toe on. Then the rebound comes back to Montour. He's got a half-empty net, but ends up putting it off the post, as he kind of had to do a diving shot going to a knee as he finishes the follow-through. So it wasn't the most control that he was able to have on that secondary shot. It goes off the post out the far side. Sprong also had a great opportunity leading up to that, but the Kraken just can't seem to get the bounce that they need or the little bit of extra finish to get it into the net. Now, certainly part of the reason the Kraken weren't able to get that finish and score a goal, even with all the opportunities they did create in this third period, at least to me anyway, was a significant lack of net front presence in the offensive end. They just were not getting a lot of traffic in front of the Kings' net. And when they had opportunities to get traffic, there was a couple of spots where it was Sprong on one case, might have been Cartier in another, where they went for the opportunity to have a guy on the back door rather than in front of the net. And like, both are good, but and in different circumstances, both are good ways to score goals. Maybe having a guy on the back door, if you have that passing lane, is a better way to do it. But if you don't have a passing lane to the back door, there's absolutely no point in being there. So then you just have to get in front of the net and try and take the eyes away from the goaltender, especially late in a game like this. They just weren't able to do that. Riddick is able to see the puck on just about every Kraken shot, right up until the last few minutes, where the Kraken get a power play, and with just about 3.5 minutes left in the game, or maybe 4 minutes, they decide to pull the cord, go to 6-on-4. They do kind of need to score on this power play, though, if they want any chance. They aren't able to. Right as the power play comes to an end, though, Montour, with a shot from the blue line, finally has traffic in front of the net. A couple Kings players screening, as well as Cartier in front of Riddick. So Riddick doesn't see the shot coming until it's too late. It gets past him on the near side, where he probably allowed a little bit too much room for Montour to shoot at on the near side. Still, a great shot finds its way through traffic. Riddick gets just a piece, but not enough to prevent it from going in. That breaks up the shutout. but the Kraken aren't able to score again. They do get another couple of chances. Tolvanen had a shot. McCann had a one-timer that Riddick made another good save on after the Kraken had at least brought it to within one. But it's too little too late. The Kraken end up falling 2-1. They also, by the way, I skipped over it, but the one good chance the Kings had in this third period back the other way was another 2-on-1, where this time instead of overpassing, they don't pass at all. So it's a clean shot that Decord's able to make the save on. Yeah. In the end, just not as bad as some of those games in the previous road trip where the Kraken just didn't seem to play the first two periods. This one I feel like was a little bit less to do with the Kraken just not playing the first 40 minutes like we saw happen a few times in a row in the previous road trip, and more to do with the Kings not allowing the Kraken to play their game, or the Kings kind of forcing their style onto this game. That low event, make it hard to transition cleanly, and just prevent offense, since, well, the Kings don't really produce a lot of offense the other direction. If they can prevent you from producing offense, then yeah, a couple mistakes is all it takes. They get the lead and the win. Now, at the same time, I don't want to take the responsibility entirely off the Kraken, who even with the Kings playing a suffocating neutral zone style of play, even if it's not the same 1-3-1 that we've seen in years past from them, it's still a similar strategy, just with a different approach. The Kraken had some opportunities to transition through the neutral zone and into the offensive end in the first two periods, but there was a lot of passes into skates and just passes wide of the target. It was not clean from the Kraken, even aside from what the Kings were doing to slow things down. Eventually in the third period, they are able to clean that up and get things going. But, I mean, in a similar case to the previous road trip, where if you don't play the first 40 minutes, sometimes the last 20 isn't going to be enough to come back. In this case, they just didn't play well enough in the first 40 minutes, and the last 20, again, was not enough to come back. In the end, then, it's a disappointing loss for the Kraken against a Kings team that is right in that same kind of area that you would like to be in and hope to be in at the end of the season. The kind of bubble playoff, whether that's the third spot in the Pacific or one of the wild card spots. This is a Kings team that's going to be in that race with the Kraken, maybe the Canucks, maybe the Flames, the way they continue to play towards the end of the year. I think you kind of expect both the Oilers and Golden Knights to be in the top three, so then that leaves the third spot and maybe a wild card spot for a couple of other teams in the division. And this is one of the teams that you're in that race with, so you really want to take advantage of these games. The Kraken aren't able to even get a point out of it by trying to force overtime there at the end. Fortunately for the Kraken, the good news is that they're still at NHL 500 within striking distance with a lot of teams right around 500, within game or two of 500 at this point in the season, and they're coming up here on a stretch of very, very winnable games against the two worst teams in the division and two of the worst teams in the league in the Ducks and Sharks, with the next two games against Anaheim and then two back-to-back against San Jose after Thanksgiving. Though with that said, this loss does make those games a little bit more important to take care of business in, and neither of those teams are quite as bad, I would say, as they were last year, at least to this point in the season. The Sharks certainly aren't as bad as they were last season. That's definitely a team that if you don't take them seriously coming in, they will show up and beat you with, well, especially Macklin Celebrini, the first overall pick from the draft, now that he's back from an early injury, is playing very well for the Sharks. It's definitely not the pushover of a team that we saw last year, and the Kraken still found a way to embarrass themselves once against them last season. So it's a game that they'll have to show up for, or two games there that they'll have to show up for. And then the Ducks are still a bit of a mess. They aren't able to score as much as you would think they could with some of the young offensive talent that they have. But Dostal is playing very well in net for that team. So at least one of the two games the Kraken are going to play against them could be one that they have a hard time scoring if they can't get Dostal moving and can't create some good passing plays in the offensive end to do so. Or maybe even more importantly, and this again was a little bit more the issue in this game against the Kings, so I suppose it's a little more relevant, if they can't get traffic in front of Dostal, in front of the Ducks net in these next two games, they could be ones that once again are these type of games that just are determined by one or two bad mistakes one way or the other, which is very much not the type of game you want to be playing against a team that you should beat and need to beat to make sure you're staying in the race to make the playoffs. Of course, the good news for the Kraken is that even though Dostal has been one of the statistically best goaltenders in the NHL to this point in the season, well, the Kraken have another one of the statistically best goaltenders in the NHL in Decord at the other end of the ice, so that helps clean up at least some of the mistakes, and did in this game against the Kings, with at least a couple of 2-on-0s, one of which shorthanded, the Discord was able to bail them out on. With that though, as always, we finish up with the Kraken 3 stars, brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you want to help decide the Kraken 3 stars, or if there are 3 in games like this one, you can help support a little bit more than you already are by watching to this point, which I appreciate, by going to the link down below and supporting on Patreon as well. In this one, I don't think we're getting 3 stars, we're going to have just 2, and even at that, somewhat obvious ones. The first star for me is Joey Discord. He gave the Kraken a chance to win this game, and honestly, I was ready to make a joke about how maybe it was Grubauer in net with Discord's jersey based on the Kraken inability to score. They did eventually get 1 goal to break up the shutout, so that made the joke a little bit less prescient for how things have gone for Grubauer as far as offense the other way so far this season. But yeah, Discord just not getting any support in spite of bailing the Kraken out on a number of occasions in this game. And yeah, the power play goal is one he probably could have played a little bit better, even with that power play being one the Kings, like I said, a couple of times never should have had. But he did more than enough to make up for it the rest of the game. And then the second star, again, not too much of a surprise probably here. I am going with Montour. Even outside of the goal, I think I probably would have given him one anyway. It might have been a little bit more on the fence if I would have gone it without the goal, but he did have a fantastic game. He obviously gets the goal to break up the shutout, but also had a couple of back checks that prevented breakaway chances for the Kings. So transition-wise, the Kraken could have been a little bit cleaner defensively in this game. At least Montour, for the second straight game, was able to bail the Kraken out defensively by catching back up to a play and breaking up those chances, or at the very least making it easier for Discord to come up with the saves on them. Though it would be nice if the Kraken could just clean things up a little bit defensively, especially in transition, and not allow those odd man chances and breakaways back the other way that guys like Montour then have to go to try and stop, if not forcing another highlight reel save from Discord or Grubauer when he's in net. Either way, hopefully the Kraken can get back into the flow of things and take advantage of the opportunity in front of them here with the 2 games against the Ducks and the 2 games against the Sharks. If they're able to take advantage of that, then, well, 14-10-1 is not a terrible place to be just after Thanksgiving. With that, though, and trying not to get too ahead of ourselves there by saying that record that we still, knock on wood, hope will be the Kraken record by the end of the back-to-back against the Sharks, I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comment section below on this game, where the Kraken are at this season, maybe the Shane Wright situation. I don't know, whatever you feel like commenting on, I'd love to see it down in the comments. And until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other. God bless. Hope you get power back if you don't already have it, and go Kraken.